Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Beds podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and we've got a little change up today, although it's a voice that many of you will recognize. We've got Karl Bode joining us, freelance reporter and writer extraordinaire. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So people have not heard a segment pulled out of what you are going to say in the future to ease them into the show. And there's no intro music, I think. We're just running right into this. We have no editing. We're recording this on Monday morning, releasing it on Tuesday for complicated reasons that have to do with me not wanting to do it last week. So, Karl, I appreciate you joining me for this voyage.
Absolutely no problem. I'm happy to be here.
We are going to be talking about a couple of things that popped out of the long former President Trump interview with Joe Rogan. We're going to spend probably, I don't know, more than a few minutes on that. And then we're going to talk about just briefly, and I think this is actually going to come right out of that discussion. 15 attorneys general have signed on to invalidate the Universal Service Fund, which was surprising to me. Then we're going to really dig in a little bit on broadband caps, which the FCC is investigating. We're going to talk about the nutrition labels and how that's going, and then briefly the survey from U.S. News and World Report. That's the agenda for today, and it kind of overlaps a little bit with the 100th ish episode of Connect This, which I hope people have checked out. We had Gigi Sohn and Blair Levin, but we missed terribly Travis. We'll get him back. He has listened to the show. He thought it was okay, so we got his thumbs up on it, which was good. But Karl, before we jump into this, I do want to ask you something.
Yes.
Are you the same Karl Bode who writes for Community Nets as writes for Tech Dirt? Because it's two different voices.
No, I know. Yeah. Well, as a freelance reporter, I have to gauge my audience based on on what they're used to. Sometimes I have a little more leeway to espouse my opinion. Other times I'm doing hard reporting where I want to make sure I'm just getting the data and facts in there. So yeah, I do change it up. Sometimes there's an occasional F-bomb dropped in. I'm feeling particularly heated. But yeah, I'm all over the map these days in terms of tone. But my focus is always the same. Consumer protection. So much of modern reporting is fixated on business interest. Everything's filtered through a lens of, does this make money, and how can I make the most money possible at any single time? And there's very little perspective filtered through the lens of consumer welfare. That's an afterthought in a lot of coverage. So that's always my goal. No matter what the tone is, I always try to make sure that I stick to that point, because
I've seen that, right? And you've been doing it for like 30 years now, right?
Yeah. Well, I helped build DSLreports.com, where I spent about 15 years studying the broadband industry and writing about it every day and dealing with consumer complaints about their broadband providers. So that's an education, if there ever was one. If you'd like to learn about the broadband industry, spend about 20 minutes with a Comcast customer or a room full of Comcast customers, and you're gonna learn a lot. Or the alternative is watch Comcast lobby for laws on the federal and state levels and see how laws actually get made, and that's super educating.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna jump into this interview. I have to admit I'm not a big Joe Rogan fan, although I love podcasting. Just for reasons that I think will become evident as we discuss some of the claims that were made in the course of this. But Donald Trump sat down with Rogan and had a long discussion, and in it they talked a bit about internet access and particularly Starlink. And former president said that that when he talked to people in North Carolina, they said that the Starlink that they had now received after the hurricane wiped out a lot of the telecommunications infrastructure was better than the wires. And Karl, I got to tell you, I thought we'd start here because I agree with him. I'm sure that people were telling him that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he was. Yeah.
The wires were really bad in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, they were terrible. They were the first things to go. They found out they had basically no redundancy in terms of fiber coming into that area. Once again, I mean, this is like the 40th time this has happened, where a big disaster comes, wipes out the entirety of 911 service and telecom, and suddenly people realize, oh, maybe we should have some redundant options in these areas. Oh, rural America is important.
Yeah,
it's the same lesson. We don't always we don't learn from it repeatedly, but It keeps
Yeah, so
happening.
the fiber cables got wiped out. So did the copper cables that most of the people rely on
Yeah,
because there's not a ton of fiber. There's some
yeah,
areas where we saw some good investment from co-ops and a few small private companies, but this is an
yeah.
area that had been pretty much left behind.
Yeah, cellular was wiped out too. I know some
Yes.
of the carriers did better than others. I think AT&T did a little better than some of the others that were offline for days and days without much in the way of communicating anything to the customers. So yeah, it
Yes.
was a mess. And in that instance, in those situations, sure, if you can get a Starlink terminal to that area and you can get it powered and the people can afford to pay the $120 a month for it or whatever, then it's a great option.
So we're going to talk about the rest of that little exchange. And I want to note something, which is that I read this, it kind of melted my brain. I got angry. I wrote 4 paragraphs on LinkedIn. It's already had more than 4,000 views because when you write something with passion and people start commenting, then the algorithm really juices
Yeah,
it up.
you
And
know,
one of the things that kills me is the number of people that write in to say, I actually really like my satellite Starlink. And I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
no one's disputing that. It is
yeah.
the
No,
best satellite service out there.
it's good. It's an amazing improvement over the old satellite stuff. The problem is twofold. It doesn't have the capacity to scale. We can't
Right.
get enough satellites up there to really make a huge impact to challenge the monopolies. It's only going to hit a certain number of million of customers. It doesn't have capacity. And the
Yes.
other
And
problem is it's expensive. $120 a month plus whatever the hardware costs. One of the big, as you know, one of the biggest obstacles for broadband access in the U.S. is affordability, and people can't afford those kind of things. They need cheap access. So
right. Yes.
so
So
it's
we're
not
gonna
it's not like a magic bullet. Starlink is fine and it's great. And I'm glad that people are enjoying it on their RVs and recreational vehicles and boats, and that's all great. And if you have the money to spend it for your cabin out in the wilderness, that's wonderful. But it is not a full scale solution for broadband problems. In
not
the
for a
podcast,
community.
the
Right.
podcast really, both of them, Rogan and Trump, really get into like how this is just like this magical thing. You just plunk a bunch of Starlink terminals down
Hmm.
and it fixes everything. And for somebody who's spent decades writing about complicated policy, that's frustrating to have it all untangled in a matter of 30 seconds by people who don't really, neither of them really know what they're actually talking about.
Right. So Trump goes on to say we're spending $1 trillion to get cable all over the country to upstate areas. That's a quote.
Mm.
And it's not accurate, but whatever. Like it's not a trillion.
42.5
I mean,
billion, right?
I think you and I would agree that there's been a lot of waste. Not
Yeah,
what the Republicans would call waste.
yeah,
They
you're right.
don't. They actually think that writing big checks to AT&T to get nothing back is a good idea.
Right.
For many of the elected Republicans, I should say, not the people who vote for Republicans, often don't think that's a good idea. They agree with you and me on that.
Yeah,
But we haven't spent $1 trillion on it. We have spent a lot, and right now we're in the process, more or less, over the past 4 years and the next several years of spending on the order of $100 billion, maybe more,
yeah.
on this sort of thing. But so then Rogan says 42 billion were wasted on this internet access program, meaning BEAD. And you've heard me and I've heard you being very critical of BEAD, and yet I would not think that's an accurate characterization in any way.
No, no. I mean, a part of it is that that money's going to start flowing here in the spring, but that's after the election. Right now, you see folks like FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr claiming that BEAD was a big waste of money because he
Mhm.
knows the money's not coming until after the election. So he can say before the election that Democrats wasted $42.5 billion on nothing, when that's not true. And also, there's very legitimate reasons that money has taken a little while to get to the states who are
That's
now
what I
just
wanted to
starting.
poke you on. You've talked about this. So why did you pick on Carr there? Has he been involved in some way and why it
Well,
took so
yes.
long to get it rolled
Why,
out?
yes, in fact, he has. He was directly, involved in the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, the FCC program that under Trump, I forget how much money they doled out. 20 billion was it?
Well, it was supposed to be a total of 20 over 2 auctions. The first auction was going to be like 11, but I think like 6 billion's been released. My colleague Christine and Rye, they have a dashboard that tracks this. I think it's
Yeah.
between 4 and 6 billion that has actually been rolled out.
Yeah. But while Carr was there at the FCC, they didn't track if the ISPs that were claiming the funds could actually deploy the promised network. So you had a lot of companies, including Starlink, jumping in there and saying, sure, we'll offer broadband to this huge swath of area for X number of dollars. And they didn't really do their due diligence to make sure that could happen. So you got all these defaulting bidders, you got a huge mess, people having to run back in there and say, okay, why wasn't this money spent? And part of the reason for the BEAD infrastructure bill delays are because they actually want to try to do this correctly. They wanted to map broadband access, make sure that you're sending money into the places that make sense. They wanted to make sure that they were getting ISPs that could actually deliver on the promised network speeds and prices. And so, yes, there's a delay. And yeah, the agency in charge of it, the NTIA, does have a history of not being the quickest on things, but it's not like this has become a boondoggle. I think there's a
I
lot of
would
politics being played pre money deployment and pre election to make it sound like that money is just being thrown in the ocean when that's clearly not the case.
there is a boondoggle though, and it's the maps. And this is where I'd
Yes.
even blame
Oh,
Commissioner
God. Yeah.
Carr on it also,
Yeah.
because the Trump FCC, like the all other FCCs, whether they're from President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, like
Yeah.
all of them said, we don't need to map where broadband really is. We'll
We'll
just
just
take
take Comcast at his word because that
yeah.
works out
Yeah. And I
better
mean, and
for everybody.
Comcast isn't even the most egregious about
Yeah.
it. I mean,
Yeah.
so this is the first of several times in which I'm going to defend Comcast in this show, I predict,
No worries.
which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
funny. But it's this thing in which, like, this the thing that frustrates me is if they would actually, if they listen to me, and I don't want to actually go there and do the work, I'll be honest. But like, if they would just listen to me armchair quarterbacking, they are determined to make sure that not one location gets money if they already have an option, right? That's why the mapping has to be perfect. Whereas
Yeah.
my point of view is let's figure out how, in general, to get it to the right regions and make sure there's universal service. And if a few families happen to then get a competitive option, that's still a win.
Yeah.
But no, instead, we're going to spend all of this money and super wastefully with these contracts with cost quests that are very
Oh, yeah.
much not in the public interest.
Right.
This
To
whole thing,
provide data that the public doesn't own,
right?
that CostQuest owns.
And so
They've
like
spent all that
there's
money.
like this is like the Russian nesting doll of just like horribleness. But Commissioner Carr is responsible for like multiple dolls within
Yeah. Yeah.
that
So
whole
so
total.
like so most of the delay on this money is thanks to his FCC and the Trump FCC, and now they're coming out and pretending like this boondoggle is just somebody else's fault.
Right.
But the reason the delays are happening is because of systemic failures that they played a role in earlier. So it's all political patty cake at this point, and it got very silly. And I,
So at
I
this
was
point, go ahead.
I was really frustrated when Musk came out, I think, a couple weeks ago and said that people died because Starlink didn't get their $1 billion in subsidies that the Trump
Oh
FCC
yeah, ridiculous claim.
wanted to send out to.
Unrelated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty gross. I mean, that's a pretty gross statement to say. For one thing, that money wasn't going to come until much later. It wouldn't have been there in time. You know,
Right. That money gets it's literally a monthly check that would go
yeah,
out for the number of locations. And so I don't know if you would have had any extra launches. I don't think that they I think right now they're kind of limited by some other politics, good or bad. I think possibly bad. I don't know the
yeah,
full story that's limiting their launches,
yeah,
but anyway, yeah, no, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous claim that somehow if Ardoff had given the money to Elon Musk to Starlink and SpaceX, I should say, which is not actually run as much by Elon Musk as I believe her name's Gwen. Oh, I can't remember her last name now. But there's a person who actually runs SpaceX and like gets things done and like just never gets any of the credit. Like it's amazing
yeah.
to me.
That's how it works at most of his companies, actually. But yeah,
At any rate, yeah, there's no reason to think that if Ardov had given money in violation of the rules, basically,
yeah, yeah,
because yeah, it's not clear to me. We've covered this on previous shows. I think the FCC is correct in
yeah,
that
absolutely.
SpaceX did not meet the terms of the program.
Yeah,
But at any rate, so Rogan says 42 billion were wasted. That's ridiculous, and the money hasn't been spent yet. Although, you know, it plays into this idea that government can't do anything right, which drives me nuts, even as I'm criticizing how
yeah,
government works.
yeah.
So former President Trump then says they haven't hooked up one person, not one person. I think Travis might have sent him that line. I don't know. So, but so then Rogan says they could have gotten Starlinks to everybody with that kind of money. And this is the part that I want to dive into more because this is a popular misconception,
Yeah,
particularly again among Republican legislators in DC who seem to think if we just give more money to Elon Musk, we would more rapidly solve this issue and make sure everyone in rural areas could be hooked up. So let
yeah.
me just ask you this. What do you think would happen if we gave billions of dollars to SpaceX for Starlink for increased coverage?
They would start to deploy it. If people could afford it, they'd quickly notice that their service was slowing to a crawl.
Why
Starlink
is
would
that?
start implementing because they lack the satellite capacity to actually serve more than, I forget what the total is, 5 to 10 million people, without starting to implement really sophisticated network management tricks that'll slow down your connection. Even at the maximum number of satellite launches, there's several stories and studies on this. I think one telecom firm talked about it. Even if you have the maximum number of low Earth orbit satellites out there, you cannot even make a dent in the needs of this country's capacity needs. You cannot do it. And Musk himself was clear about this really early. He
Hmm.
was like, "This is capacity constrained service. We cannot do this at scale." But when it's time to get subsidies, he's suddenly like, "Yes, just Starlink everywhere. It's a magic bullet. Everybody will be fine."
Yeah, so I was talking about this with Roger Timmerman, who's an actual engineer who runs Utopia Fiber. He happens to be an engineer, and I was like, "How do you respond to this, and where do you think the technology is going to be?" And he pointed me out to this thing, satellite map dot space. So
Mm,
if anyone wants to in their browser, you can pull up satellite map dot space. And I was really curious. It shows you the globe and where all the satellites are, and also where the ground stations are for Starlink. And so I've had this map as we've been talking. There was a period in which there was not a single Starlink satellite over North Dakota. Doesn't mean that people wouldn't have service, but like, if they could see, if you were in the northern part, you might get one over Saskatchewan. If you're in the southern part, you might be able to hook onto a satellite over South Dakota. But North Dakota has hundreds of thousands of people. I think like 600, 700,000, 700,000 people. I'm going to guess that that's on the order of 300,000 premises.
mm.
And you can't serve them all from zero satellites or one or
No,
two
I mean,
satellites. Iowa just had two satellites over. Now it has like six or seven, and the maximum number of connections per satellite simultaneous, I would think, is on the order of like 3 or 4 thousand. If you
yeah.
have every one of those satellites is a 10 gigabit satellite.
Yeah. It's a matter of, I mean, people take it to take me to say I'm criticizing Starlink, and it's a matter of physics. Like this is a
Right.
capacity issue. This service cannot scale it the way they're saying it can scale, and that was the FCC's concern. If we're going to spend taxpayer money, the Biden FCC came in and said we're going to spend it on future-proof fiber. We're going to push fiber as far as we can, and the rest of the people can get cellular and 5G and fixed wireless. And for those left over, they can maybe get Starlink. Starlink is the niche solution that comes at the end of everything else. If we have not been able to get you, then yeah, sure, satellite can come in, and satellite will improve and get better. And maybe over time, the capacity will grow. There'll be more competitors, and 10, 15, 20 years from now, it'll be a different story. But right now, it's not some magic bullet. And the
Well, that's
people
what
talking like Rogan and Trump are acting like this is just pixie dust. You sprinkle a little Elon Musk pixie dust on the landscape of rural America, and everybody's connected and happy and served. It's just that's not the real world.
Yeah, we're looking at, I think right now he has 6,000 satellites, wants to grow the constellation to 60,000 over the next 5, 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's still not nearly enough to cover, even if we were equally spaced throughout
yeah,
rural America,
yeah,
which we are not.
yeah,
There are many areas of rural America where you just cannot have every home having access because of the way the system works. You can't
yeah,
you can't overload specific regions just because of like you're shooting a satellite, hundreds of miles, you're shooting this wireless hundreds of miles,
right.
and you have some challenges with the number of like receivers and things like that that you can go
Uh,
back and forth with, is my
and
understanding.
I think they're going to try anyway, and then I
Yeah.
think they're going to be forced to implement all kinds of weird usage restrictions, like you can't stream 4K video eventually, and it'll start being more like the HughesNet of old, where they had like these weird rotating daily usage allotments that, like during the afternoon, I can't stream a 4K video. And there's other issues with Starlink as well that we could get into, like the fact that all of the Starlink launches are kind of harming scientific night sky research. So there's some issues with like when all of these, disposable smaller satellites burn up in orbit, there's potential to harm the ozone layer. There's a
Yeah,
whole
I
bunch
want
of
to
things
I
you can
want
get
to talk about
into
that. I mean,
that
I'll
like,
tell you, I'm not a killjoy. I had a chance. I
no,
was hanging out with my friend Matt Rantanen and his partner Sarah and in Southern California, and we saw this magnificent thing on the horizon. And later we found out it was a SpaceX launch. Kind of figured it out from Vandenberg Base. It was amazing,
yeah,
and it's just at the same time you
yeah,
get a sense of the you can imagine that, like, yeah, if you do like, tens or 100 of these a year, there would be some environmental devastation. You
yeah,
start doing more and more of that, It's
Yeah.
more, and we don't know what it is right now. Maybe it's nothing, but like you're saying, you've got, if we're gonna have 60,000 satellites and they're gonna be spinning down and disintegrating in the
Yeah,
atmosphere every
leaving all
five
kinds
years,
of metals in them. There was a study pretty recently
aluminum
that talked
oxide. Yeah.
yeah, exactly right. Yep, yep, that's going to impact our efforts to repair the ozone layer. So I mean, you can have this complicated capacity constrained system that has a whole bunch of environmental and scientific impacts that you might not want to deal with, or you can push fiber into remote people, which
Right.
is what we should have done 50 years ago if we had a competent regulatory agency in charge
50
of this
years would have
stuff.
been hard, but yeah.
Well, yeah, well, you know what I mean. Yep,
Yep.
yep.
Yeah, it should have
But
been
it,
done. This is, and I'll just remind everyone of former Commissioner Mike Riley drove me nuts because he was always like, "Ah, people want to get a Porsche when they should get a Chevy," and it's like, no, you're paying for a Porsche over and over again, and people are
yeah,
getting a Chevy. Like, this is the
yeah,
real problem.
you got a little inverted. Yeah,
No.
exactly right.
All right. So we spent a little bit more time on that. We're going to dive in. So then on top of this, right now we have tons of rural access. In fact, like more than 1,000 rural entities, many of them private, small private companies, hundreds of co-ops that have invested in rural areas and often with rural federal dollars. And they pay off those loans that they have often from local banks or from the federal government with the money that they get every month from the federal government for universal service. And what is it, the Sixth Circuit, the Fifth Circuit, the Fifth, I forget which one now, Fifth Circuit in this case, it wants to
I,
blow it up.
yeah,
And I was surprised to see that 15 Republican attorneys general want to invalidate the USF. They sent a letter to the Supreme Court. I think they actually did like an amicus or like, encouraging the Supreme Court to review the case, which is good because we want the Supreme Court to review the case, but we
yeah,
also want it to come down the other way. It
yeah,
just sort of boggled my mind that all these people just want to literally create possibly the greatest financial crisis in rural America in the
yeah,
history of the country
exactly.
on a
So
lark.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's part of a broader effort to dismantle the entirety of the regulatory state. They lump it all. Government can do absolutely no good. We might as well dismantle all this stuff. None of it's serving us. If we just get rid of all of it, magic
Mhm.
utopian grass comes from the sidewalk and everybody lives happy ever after. And it's just not. It's not reality. And it is
And
frustrating to see all those officials suddenly come in and want to dismantle this program that has had its problems. I've written about them. There was some waste in the USF program, but it's
mhm.
also connected a lot of people's schools. It's connected and educated a lot of kids. It's helped a lot of people in rural America, and it's gross to just be tossing it away
Well,
over some.
that's the issue, right? Is that like if someone wanted to write to me and say, you know what, Chris, I don't think you're taking concerns seriously as a principled conservative. I would like to see this, this, and this. I would probably say 100% agree with you. Like, I have many deeply conservative critiques of the way USF is done.
Yeah,
I don't think that throwing 1,000 businesses into bankruptcy, threatening the balance sheets of
right.
many local banks, and potentially having a default on 1,000 loans to the federal government is the way to do that through the courts.
Yeah, it's like ripping out the girders from bridges and then having a little party by the bridge while it falls into the water. It makes no coherent sense. But this is where we are in a lot of the policy fights right now. There's really, like I said, a concerted effort to dismantle governance of all kind. They just
Mhm.
see governance as bad. It's not a complicated ideology. It's not based in facts. It's based in gut feelings and vibes. And it's not the real world, and it's dangerous. And we're
Yeah,
entering a new phase in it.
I think a lot of people feel that their actions have no consequences, and I
Yeah.
get that. I want a world where people have more control over their lives, but it freaks me out when I see attorneys general acting like their actions
Yeah.
have no
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah. Well, you see, they're increasingly engaged in more and more gamesmanship. You saw it in the big tech fights too. The claims that big tech is censoring conservative voices on the internet. They've
Mhm.
been big players in that too, trying to bully Google into making sure they carry the latest hate rally speech or whatever. It's been pretty ugly for a few years now. That's just a broader extension of that stuff.
Well, we're going to move on to broadband caps. You've been covering this a
My
bit. The Federal
favorite, yeah,
Communications Commission is taking comments on this.
yeah,
And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. One of the things that I think, again, I'm going to get three references to Travis in on this, but Travis with USI Fiber would say he loves broadband, loves the bandwidth caps. It drives a lot of customers from
right
Comcast
into
to
his
him.
lap. No, I'm
Yeah.
sure exactly right. I
I'm
literally
with I'm
think,
with Lumen Fiber now, and I thought I would never work again with a company that was a derivative of US West or Quest. I was
yeah,
so infuriated with their service in my like
miserable,
20 years ago, but here I am.
miserable. Yeah. I literally, I'm not joking when I say I think I've spilled more ink on this subject than any reporter alive in usage caps. I'm pretty sure over the last 25 years, I've written more
Oh
articles
yeah.
and pieces and stories about this. And it took so long to get people to understand that they are not a real technical solution to anything. They're a complete fabrication. They exist exclusively so local monopolies can price gouge captive customers and make it sound like there's a good reason of it. And for years they would say it was because they needed to manage network congestion.
Mhm.
And academics and network people would come out and say that's not how any of this works. It doesn't
Well,
manage anything. It
in
doesn't do
theory,
that.
if you had a cap, and to come back to the stationary geostationary satellite, they would have like daily cap or caps during prime time and things like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, if you do
Those
like
kind of caps could manage congestion.
in a really annoying way, yeah, to the point where
Yeah.
your connection is useless half the time. But yeah,
Right, but like the idea that like if I'm gonna be uploading a bunch of video at 2 a.m.,
yeah,
that capping me is gonna help congestion anyway is
no,
absurd.
especially in an era where network management technologies are so intelligent and so sophisticated, and there's so much automation determining just they're detecting loads in real time and shifting everything using intelligent algorithms, and the caps are just like a blunt hammer, and
Mhm.
even eventually they stopped even trying to defend them. I don't know, it was like 5 or 8, 10 years ago. Like I think there was a leaked Comcast memo that said, like, basically admitted this was about basically price gouging. This isn't really there's no technical function to these things. And since then, the companies, the ISPs that have them don't even try to defend or justify them.
Yeah, I mean, for, what, like 10% of Comcast customers, I want to say it's an increase probably of like 30%
Yeah.
revenue, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yep.
you can't
Yep.
just take that revenue away, especially with the kind
Yeah.
of headwinds that
Yeah.
Comcast is facing.
Investors would
Um,
not be happy with that. So you got to
yeah,
keep price gouging. So it's kind of a self sustaining organism. But you notice that those caps for Comcast don't exist in the northeast part of the state or a
no.
country where they compete with fiber. Verizon Fios is everywhere in those territories. And so they don't have them there. So, and that's the benefit of municipal broadband is most of those networks don't have them. You know,
I don't know of one that has them at this
I was
point.
going to ask you about that
Yeah.
before we came on. I was looking at it and I was trying to think of one that, and I don't think there's a single community broadband network that has them because they
No, there
serve
was
no
a few
function.
that
They just piss off your subscriber base at this point.
yeah, there was a few that flirted with them out of concern, and
Yeah.
many of them decided that it was not worth the public relations hit.
Yeah. I remember talking with Sonic CEO Dane Jasper a couple of times about it, and he was always hilariously, succinct in the way he would just point out that these serve no technical function. It is
Yeah.
bullshit. They
And
are
it's worth
bullshit.
noting, I feel like those people who have gotten into this field in the past few years probably aren't familiar with Phil Dampier, what Stop the Cap.
Oh yeah,
He
he did
might he
wonderful
might
work.
rival
Yeah,
you for the number
yeah,
of
yeah,
words written, but
yeah, yeah,
he's been so great, and he's been kind of doing other things, but he was a real great warrior on
yeah.
similar beat to you.
Yeah, he really drove a lot of local activism efforts, in upstate New York specifically during the merger when there's debates about whether cap should be allowed, But
Mhm.
and now the FCC, I'm sure you were going to mention this, but the FCC is finally saying they're going to quote unquote look into usage caps. In the year 2024, after 25 straight years of debate about this subject, the federal regulator and actually in charge of our telecom systems is going to look into things.
Yes, and I'm not going to say a negative word about it because I have been very critical of
You've said enough
Chairperson
lately.
Rosenworcel, and I'll
Yeah,
just say that
yeah.
I think this is wonderful. It's
I'm
nice
happy.
to see
I
positive
am
action.
happy. I'm happy. On the plus side, they did open a website that kind of illustrates that these things are harmful. I'm
Mhm.
glad that they're taking a look. I'm glad they're talking about it. It's good to make it clear to people that this exists. Am I confident that they're going to come out and have the bold step of actually banning them? Probably not. Am
I'd
I
like to see it.
convinced that they could survive legal challenge in this post Chevron Supreme Court environment if they tried? Not sure,
I
but
was
I'm
just going to
glad they're at
say
least
that. I
mentioning
mean,
it.
there's a perverse kind of reaction that is possible from what I would call the overreach of the courts into these agencies that have been set up by Congress to do these tasks. And that is to basically say, all right, well, if the courts are going to if the courts are going to bat everything away, we're just going to go real hardcore into this and
Yeah.
say, yeah, companies can't do this and this and that.
Yeah.
And then
You're
like
going to sue either way.
you can
You're
get the
going to sue either way.
popularity of having done it. I mean, this is kind of what the Biden administration has done with student loans is to say,
Yeah. A little
a
bit.
bunch of
Yeah.
announcements that get them good press and then it gets
Yeah.
repealed and then they come out with another announcement. And
Yeah, exactly right. I have plenty of criticisms of the Biden administration in various parts, but they have actually cared about stuff like antitrust reform, at least at the FTC. And they
Mhm.
tried to get Gigi Sohn appointed to the FCC. I know he was personally had a stake in her appointment, and it didn't work because Congress is a corrupt mess. So it didn't happen. But I know that they had a genuine interest in that stuff, and I applaud that. That's
Yes.
I've watched that agency for 25 years, and it hasn't been a lot of care about monopoly power or consolidated antitrust reform. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate that somebody's finally taking that stuff seriously, and I hope it continues in a Harris term. We'll
Yeah,
see. I'm not sure, but
that's one of
we'll
those
see.
things that is not clear. This is a personal thing. It's not a Democratic Party thing.
Yeah,
And so we could see Democratic administrations like Harris and perhaps whoever might succeed her. If we go that route, we might see them not
yeah,
going nearly as ambitious. Although I kind of think in the long term we will. I kind of think in the next 4 years it's possible we'll step back from the bold efforts of the Biden administration. But I kind of think the following administration, or
yeah. Down the road, I agree. I
yeah, I
agree with
think the
that. Yeah.
movement, the people are fed up.
Yeah,
It's
especially I think as there is a concerted effort to dismantle the regulatory state, all of the oversight, safety oversight, consumer oversight,
Mhm.
labor oversight, and when the results of that hit, they will not be subtle, they will not be pretty, they will be very ugly, and the public and the press will take notice. And then I think you're right, there'll eventually be a counter movement to say, okay, let's rebuild something,
Mhm.
something locally sustainable, something from the inward out. And I think that's where our organization comes into play, and I think that's where the conversation starts to get interesting. What does the next step look like after they're done dismantling the regulatory state and everyone? The problem is that period in between. There's going to be
Yeah.
deaths.
No, and I
There will
think
be
I just
fatalities.
there's a part of me that also feels like this is a problem of the people who have championed the regulatory state. I mean, I grew up in Eastern
Yeah,
Pennsylvania, and my recollection is that during significant parts of my life, there were no fish in Lake Erie. Like it was a
yeah,
dead lake, which I know is
yeah,
not near Eastern Pennsylvania, but like it was known, and it's coming back. And like we've done a lot of things that
yeah.
have like,
Fix the ozone layer.
The
Yeah,
Monongahela River has not caught on fire recently, and like
yeah.
we've done a lot of really good things, and a lot of people aren't aware of that.
Yeah,
So
no, it's true. Yeah, it is important to have some rules for
yeah.
corporations to follow occasionally. That is important.
Speaking of which, we got nutrition labels. For
Oh yeah,
food, I don't think those are going away, but we now have them for broadband too. And let me just say, I was gonna troll Comcast. I checked it out because, as I mentioned, I moved away from Comcast because of the bandwidth cap, and I had fiber finally available to me. And I looked up to see what Comcast was offering me. They offered the nutrition label was easy to find. It was
oh
clear. I
good.
was impressed. So
Yeah, I knew there
not
was
all
there was some consumer group concern that they were just gonna hide them somewhere deep in the website or something. So
Yeah, and I
that's good.
think some companies have, but Comcast hasn't. I think
That's good.
we're still trying to get a handle on all of it, but
You know,
it seems like it's pretty good.
basic transparency is definitely good. My problem there is, okay, great. You've shown the consumer that he's clearly getting ripped off, but are we going to do anything about actually ripping the consumer off? So great. I know Comcast is charging me this and imposing crappy broadband caps, and I'm paying all these weird, dumb fees that they settle on there to jack up the advertised price. But are we doing anything to actually stop that? And here in Seattle, I have the choice of one broadband provider. I'm 6 miles from downtown. It's Comcast. It's capped
Mhm.
Comcast. There's no incentive for them to stop ripping me off. And so, what are we going to do about that? Becomes the question to me.
Yeah, and the answer historically has been very little.
Nothing. Very
Now,
little.
Washington State is an interesting place where
Yes.
you
Yeah.
have Senator Benke, who is on the Republican side,
Yeah.
and the new Senator Hansen, right? Drew Hansen is now a senator from over on Bainbridge Island, I think. And
Yep.
the two of them, he's a Democrat, and the two of them have been working very hard, I think, in the public interest on broadband and telecom type issues. I think it'd be awesome if we saw Washington State start collecting the broadband labels and making data more publicly available
Yeah,
for
I
a good
agree.
marketplace. I mean, this is
Yeah,
not like a socialist vision. This is literally out of Adam Smith's playbook of like
yeah,
making pricing transparent so
yeah,
people can, the market will, it's not just for other people, but for other suppliers to better
yeah, yeah,
operate.
yeah. Partisanship has made people silly. I mean,
Mhm.
basically, a lot of this stuff, basic transparency is good. I don't care how much, what kind of spin you want to put at it, political or otherwise. But transparency is good. I want to know what I'm paying. I want to know if there's weird limitations on my connection. I want to know, that what I am advertised on the website is what I'm going to pay. We can
Mhm.
start there, and that's good. But you only have so much leverage against a company when it's a monopoly with so much power. you know Again, where
Well,
community broadband enters the conversation, you can kind of incentivize these big companies to try a little
y-
harder.
you had written about this several times, but I think it's been 10 years since my colleague Lisa, this goes back to the Time Warner cable age before the Charter merger. Time Warner Cable was famous for refusing to tell you what your actual rate would be after the promotional period.
Yeah,
They'd give you a promo rate, and no matter what you said or asked, they would not tell you what the long-term rate
yeah,
was. They said
yeah.
you had to wait to find out.
Yeah, good luck. And even then it would change month to month. They have all these complicated math that they would never really explain to you.
Yeah.
Why is my bill higher in January than it was? Oh, prorating and other things we're doing, but they didn't explain it in any consistency. Yeah, so
Well, that leads
basic.
us right into the survey from U.S. News and World Report,
Yeah,
in which it seems like, I don't know, like you were saying, people are fed up.
yes, they are. Yeah, uh, pretty consistently showing that broadband prices continue to increase. And the amount that you're advertised usually is nothing like the cost you're actually going to pay. And in a lot of these bigger states, we're starting to hit the $100 a month broadband point, which is pretty costly for a lot of people.
Yes, I'll note the proviso that which Blair Levin offered on Connect This, which is
Yeah.
that this is also self-reported data.
Yep.
But it fits with what I see. Doug Dawson does a lot of these studies in which he privately figures out what people are paying,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it fits.
It's
I'll
not the
just
first to find something like this. Yeah. This is.
Well, I'd like to share the a story from Derek Turner from Free Press, who does a lot of great number crunching and doesn't always make it into the public, but he had looked at years ago the number of people who told the American Community Survey that they had satellite internet service. And then he looked at the few suppliers of satellite internet service and in their one of their Wall Street disclosures and things like that, and you could have a sense of what the total market was. And if there was like 3 million people paying for satellite at that point, the geostationary, Viasat and HughesNet, if there was 3 million people paying for that, there would be 6 million people in the American Community Survey saying that they had satellite service
Yeah.
because they didn't really know.
Yeah. Yeah. People
So,
don't know what's, well, the survey makes it clear. A lot of people have no idea what speeds they're even on.
yep.
There many may be in bundles, so they're paying combined prices. And I think carriers work really hard to make direct broadband price comparisons very complicated if you get into like bundling phone, wireless,
Hmm.
home phone, television services. And also a lot of people aren't subscribing to the fastest tier available. So people are
Yes.
just taking it. And it is self-reported data. So it's only goes so far, but it's not like this is the only report finding similar things. And in fact, the only
Hmm.
people saying otherwise are like organizations like US Telecom, who are saying, broadband prices dropped 17% in the last 4 months. But then you look at the data and it's like they're measuring it by very precise, strange metrics that they very carefully
Well,
cultivated.
it's the same thing we saw with cable television, which was the price per channel, as though a single
Yeah.
person cares what the
Yeah.
price per channel is.
Yeah. And when they implemented usage caps, they'd be like, you can send 8 million emails, to make it sound like they were these robust, wonderful limits. So these
Right.
tricks are always one of the nice things I like seeing is this shift. Like affordability was not a priority in policy for a while. And I think it's starting to shift the last few years. And these studies are starting to show real world prices more and more. I think for a long time they were tracking the the advertised prices. This is what the ISP claims it offers, and those were the
Hmm.
prices they were using to claim. And they were burying all this crap into these, below the line fees and jacking up the price and usage caps and pay your bill in person, pay $5 extra, all over the place.
The
And that
modem
stuff
rentals.
isn't,
Yep.
yeah, modem rentals. There's just a long list of this stuff that they don't include in those studies. And then you actually get your bill and you're paying $50 more a month, and the academics are telling you you're not. There's a real been a disconnect there. So I like these studies that are getting more to the real world data.
This is where I do think we will see what I will like right now. And in this show, we talked about some of the lengths that I think the right has gone to, primarily the more conservative, or the people that have historically called themselves conservatives who at this point are not
Yeah, I
conservative
don't know
anymore.
what it is now. Yeah, I don't know.
But I suspect that in 3 years, 4 years, I'm gonna be like the crank even more so than I am, annoying people on the left who are going off about how we should just take everything over with the federal
Yeah,
government and impose price controls. Because
yeah,
I'm deeply afraid that that will be a distraction that will not actually get us to
I
where we want
agree.
to go.
Yeah, I
But I
agree.
think a lot of people are going to see 87% of people want the government to do something, or that's wrong.
Yeah,
87% of people want ACP to be reinstated, but it was
yeah,
like 70
yeah.
some percent wanted to see some sort of price control from
Yes,
Washington. That
76%
scares
wanted
me.
to see the federal government do something, and I'm
Right.
sure there's a broad range of solutions there, but they want to see, they believe in the regulatory state, quote unquote. They believe in this thing we're
Hmm.
trying to dismantle. They want some help. What it looks like is different. Implementing hard price caps in a complicated market is very difficult.
Yep.
Enforcement is difficult. You're better served by driving competition to market and busting up monopolies. You're better served by cracking down on monopoly power. Build some open access fiber networks as often as you can. Get some multiple ISPs competing
Hmm.
wherever you can, and that you don't need to worry as much about consumer protection. You still should. But you don't have to worry about it quite as much if you've got actual organic market competition, which so many of these folks claim to support. Over the past 2 decades. So I think that is a better route than very strict hard limits on what you can charge. But
Yeah, it's almost like you've been involved in shaping the way I think about this stuff for decades, the way I hear you
maybe
talk about it.
so, maybe, and vice versa. Yeah, yeah. So we'll see. I think a lot of regulatory solutions now are a little performative. We look what we did today. We made Comcast say that it's ripping you off, and that's it. And we're going to go take a nap.
Hmm.
That's which is great, and it's Democrats, at least try on broadband policy. I think.
Yeah, some of them are great. And then
Yeah,
others
yeah,
are basically the best allies of the monopolies.
yeah.
It's a
Possibly.
little bit
Yeah.
frustrating.
Joe Manchin and friends. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate all your time on the show today, and we'll have to bring you back on with another kind of wrap up in the future. Although maybe we'll give you the gift of editing at that point.
Right on. Always a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at communitynets.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Twitter. His handle is @CommunityNetworks. Follow CommunityNets.org stories on Twitter. The handle's @UniNetworks. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount. Thank you to Martin